Welcome to the Nuclear Snail channel. This is the update video about distressing, so the distressing Mega Update 2020, also including the Mega FAQ. So in this video I will update you on everything I learned since I've started the channel regarding the topic of distressing and weathering. I will also answer all of your questions. Now, before we start, a couple of disclaimers. Disclaimer number one, some of the techniques I'm gonna talk about and possibly show you can be dangerous. So please use caution and you are responsible for your own actions. Don't do anything that you think might hurt you and do everything at your own risk. Disclaimer number two, I will be showing you some products. I bought all of those. I was not sponsored with any of those products. I bought them all by myself at full price, and the brands of those products do not matter in the slightest. I will be just telling you what kind of a thing it is, just the general name for it, and you can figure out how to get something like this or something similar in your country. So, before we get into all the specific FAQs, let me address the number one question, which is not about a specific technique, but which is about a general philosophy of distressing. And you can skip this section if you understand this already, but a lot of people obviously don't, which is why this comes up again and again. So the question I get all the time, or otherwise see all the time, how to distress X. X usually being a very specific kind of item, like an airsoft metal gun, an airsoft plastic gun, a leather jacket, a fake leather jacket, this type of fabric, cotton, nylon, whatever. You always get how to distress X. And I get where this is coming from. People are afraid to make a mistake. And indeed there are a couple of things that can go wrong. But for the most part, the way I deal with almost anything is this universal formula. Now, I will address in the FAQ in which cases to modify this formula accordingly to your specific item or material, okay? But as a general formula, you will usually apply some sort of mechanical distressing, so it's gonna be our serrated knives, it's gonna be our rasps, it's gonna be our other sort of rasps, it's gonna be our sanding grid, it's gonna be our sandpaper, it's gonna be abrasive cloth. Abrasive cloth is great, by the way. It's gonna be wire brushes, it's gonna be the shredder, it's gonna be dragging your stuff on the concrete floor, it's gonna be anything that causes mechanical abrasion, so the top layer is getting abrasively removed. Now, I also use this thing a lot. This is where the disclaimer comes in. This can be dangerous. So only use if you're comfortable with this and you are responsible for your own actions, because this is actually not designed by the manufacturer to work on fabric. But as I've mentioned sometimes in the past, I do this. This is called a power file, by the way. So same as a regular file, just it's motorized, so it's power file. And what it essentially is a mini version of a belt sander. Now, never ever use a full-sized belt sander to work with fabrics at all. And again, this thing can be dangerous, but I am personally comfortable with using it. I don't recommend it. You use it if you're not comfortable with it, 100%. But this is very fast to use. I use it for a lot of things, especially for leather. The last time I dragged a leather jacket behind a car, as you see in my funny videos from years ago, is that far back in time. Nowadays I just use this. Now you can also use something like this, like it's a handle in which you can put your sandpaper, or again your abrasive grid. Or sanding grid. You can use this on leather, doesn't matter. The main point about this is that you use mechanical abrasion. Talking about leather, by the way, the video that I made about leather a long time ago, it also includes chemical components such as using alcohol and acetone and some cloth to suck out the paint and all that. It kind of works, but I don't really do that anymore either. I usually just go to town on leather with this power file. Mechanical abrasion is the step number one and the one you will be using most of the time, and you can solve most of your problems with it, okay? The other point is paints. So a lot of times people will also overstress about what kind of paint to use. Nowadays what I use is mostly acrylic if it comes in a spray can, so acrylic is great. It is less toxic than some other kinds. It is cheap, it will stick to most surfaces, and you can let it dry and then spray another coat, for example in another color, and then rub it through with your sandpapers and whatnot for some cool effects like layered paint being rubbed through. Acrylic is great, but most of all what I love is fabric paint. I don't use or have any fabric paint that comes in spray cans. It usually comes in tubes or bottles, and it can be either liquid or not. I already made a video about how to use it for shirts. It's called stencil and a post-apocalyptic shirt making off. So this is exactly how you do it for clothes that are close to your body, that you wear right on the body, by the way, which is one of the FAQ questions. And fabric paint sticks really well to fabric, but it will also stick to non-fabric. In fact, if you look here, some armor parts I'm working on, like this in there, that is fabric paint. Will it still stick perfectly and be 100% abrasion resistant and all that? No, but it will stick well enough, and you don't want it to be 100% abrasion resistant, because what you want to do, what you want to be able to do, is to go here and be like, oh, there is some edge that is getting a lot of wear and tear, so I'm going to buff it up a bit. I'm going to remove some of that paint, and it being scratched up a bit doesn't make it bad, which leads me to my next point. I'm being a bit all over the place here, just listen to every single point that it will all make sense, okay? My next point is avoid technical perfection. If we're talking about paints, or if we're talking about mechanical distressing, or if we're talking about the whole picture, you should obviously avoid artistic mistakes, such as when you're using paint, don't just do like a stroke and another stroke and it looks obviously painted. That obviously looks like ass. But no one ever will notice that your distressing weathering effect is not sticking 100% and flakes off a bit. Which is why it's fine to use fabric paint for non-fabrics. It will stick good enough. And it will flake off in a couple of places, and as you wear your costume and all, it will change its appearance a bit, but it will still maintain that post-apocalyptic distressed aesthetic. And also, if it's flaking off too much or whatever, you can update it later on. I've never ever actually updated or refreshed the distressed look of my costumes ever, but you can do it if you want. So do not stress too much about technical perfection. This especially applies to people that come from cosplay or painting Warhammer figurines. Everything where your paint job needs to be pristine and also to stick really well to something. Also people who are good at handicrafting, like handyman. If you're painting like a house for someone, it needs to be like all nice and all neat, nothing may flake off. None of that applies to post-apocalyptic distressing. Do not stress about it. Just do it. Next point in this chain, so we have mechanical distressing, we have paint, and again, you can apply those methods to metal, plastic, fabric, mix of it all, everything except some special cases that we'll get to later. So we have mechanical distressing, we have paint, in particular acrylics, and fabric paint. That is the question, which paint to use, which paint to use. There is a specific question about paint for rubber, I will get to that, but for everything else, acrylic and fabric paint. Okay? Next point is dust. So in my first video I talked about just going to a construction site, getting some dirt from there and just chucking it on your stuff and then fixating it with clear spray paint. I do it in a way more efficient way by now. Now, not showing you the brand because it don't matter, but this right here is a small can, and also here in a different color, another small can of film dust or theater dust. So just punch in film dust or theater dust in your national language into your search engine, and it will spew out a couple of manufacturers of that stuff and distributors that offer it in your country. It's usually 1 or 2 per country, which is sufficient to supply it to all the hobbyists and professionals doing this stuff. Now, this stuff is really fine dust, and that is exactly the part of it that will stick. Compared to using stuff from a construction site, you will not have all that coarse sand there. which is, in my opinion, a good thing, because I just want to have the fine dust effect. I don't want it all to be full of sand. If that's something you want, keep using sand. An important point about this, which they also warn and which actually makes common sense, but I just figured I'll stress it additionally in case you didn't already think about it. Use a respirator when working with dust and spray paints. It should be a no-brainer, but I figured I'll just mention it here. Also, make sure your respirator has a good filter. So I'm not a health expert or occupational hazard expert or whatever, but just get a as brutal of a filter as you can, basically, and make sure that the mask seals all around you. It's not great with beards, by the way. Like I noticed that I still get some stuff in behind the beard. I really need to press the mask firmly with the belt to my head to avoid that. Anyway, when working with dust and all that, also when working with mechanical abrasion, it also generates dust, especially if you use a power tool, especially on fabrics. So use a mask when you do that. Now, a great way to apply this dust is this so-called, what it's called, it's a pesticide application dust bulb, or pesticide applicator, or pesticide dust bulb, or just dust bulb. Obviously you don't apply pesticides with this for this. You apply the film dust or theater dust, and the process is the same. You spray your clear spray paint onto your object, and then you just squeeze this a couple of times. I'm not gonna do this in here in the flat because it will just generate a lot of dust. But what this does is just spit out dust. By the way, I painted this as a bee, so this is Mr. B, and he helps me with distressing. It is a really simple construction. They come in many different brands and constructions, but ultimately you have a rubber bulb, and inside of this you put your dust, not full of it, like up until here or something, and then when you squeeze on it, it exhales a mixture of air and dust. Again, do not breathe it in, use your mask, do it outside or in a well-ventilated area. And this just dissipates the dust nicely. So I do my dusting like this nowadays. And by the way, this film dust or theater dust stuff, it's not expensive at all. And you might look at the small can and be like, oh, that's not a lot. But it is actually sufficient for a lot. Because the way I also do it nowadays, I have a large kind of a crate, okay, into which I put my items, and I dust on top of that, and all the dust that didn't hit the item I brush off, or all the dust that didn't stick to the item I brush off, and then I can recollect it later and reuse it. So the usage is really not minimal, but still really good mileage for the amount. Again, film dust or theater dust, good investment. The next one is fat. So to simulate grease and all that will accumulate over time on the costumes, what I use is leather fat. Looks like this. It's used for, well, it's just beeswax. It's leather beeswax. So it's wax made by bees, and people use it for leather. You can of course use it for leather, but you can also use it for other stuff. Now, I usually don't put it on pants because pants go into the washing machine, and I don't know whether or not this will hold in the washing machine, but for everything else, this works great. Let me adjust the brightness here. For everything else, it works great for stuff that doesn't go into the washing machine. You can just apply it like this, and it becomes greasy. I'm not sure you can see it on the camera, but I think you cannot, sorry. But this is actually really nice. Come on, camera, just focus. It is really nice to have this. Let's apply some here. Because as you hopefully can see now, yeah, you can see it shimmer. You see that? That simulates actual grease. You cannot replicate that effect with dry paint, okay? And yeah, I can't get the camera to focus well, I think, but try it out, especially on stuff that doesn't go into washing machine, and you will find that this is really great top layer. So I usually do this after the dusting, because you will be rubbing against surfaces and all that. The dust will come off in high contact areas. It is kind of the same idea of applying, like you apply fat to simulate that effect to the high contact areas, to the edges and all that. What you do instead on metals and other hard surfaces is some fine sandpaper or abrasive cloth. Abrasive cloth. You get that in the construction store, but just some fine grit sandpaper also works. Like, let's take this edge, for example, and we go like this. And there we go, we simulated a bit of wear and tear. Let's try another edge, maybe one that is better suited to this. Now we have this edge right here. Yeah, so we buffed this up a bit. Let me take a better edge here. This one is weird. So let's take this, right? So this is an edge, so it would be getting a lot of wear. Yeah, this looks cool. Because if you have your item, your hard surface item, and it's all just covered in dust completely, then it's great to simulate the fact that it was just lying there being covered in dust forever, right? It's like something you found in a destroyed bunker, and it has been laying there for years. But I will see it a lot of times on people's costumes that they're wearing and supposed to represent them being worn for a long time in the wasteland and fighting and falling over and celebrating and doing all kinds of stuff, living in those costumes. And you will not find any buffing or fat, depending on whether or not it's hard surface or fabric, in high contact areas. Why not? This is something I definitely started doing more and more in my costumes, because it just adds an additional layer of realism. Not only was your costume destroyed and covered in dust, but it also is being used while it's covered in dust. Okay, this is the basic formula. Okay, this is the major super update to all of this. Everything else that comes now, and I might make smaller videos about specific techniques later on, but all the stuff that comes now, the FAQ, it goes into the specifics. But if you're in doubt, just see through this, like mechanical abrasion, paint, dust, and fat or buffing, depending on whether it's hard or soft surface. This formula will get you anywhere. Okay, this formula will help you with 99% of stuff. Let's get to the FAQ, and you will see how all of the FAQ questions fall into this formula, more or less. First question: can you tell me how to weather this storm? Yarr! Well, I'm not a pirate captain, so I cannot. Sorry. Next question: distressing a metal airsoft gun. Now, you have metal, it is painted, okay? So what you do is just the same thing I did just now. Just use some sandpaper or drag it on concrete floor or all of that. What I like doing is using some rough stuff, like this rasp, as well as some fine stuff such as abrasive cloth or really fine grit sandpaper to simulate both constant soft wear as well as aggressive scratches on metal or other hard materials. And I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but like all of this stuff, the shredder, the wire brushes, all of this, you get most of this in the construction store or just in your shed. You can experiment with all kinds of different abrasive instruments, okay? I will not even go in detail about what is what. I will show you a couple. It's a rasp, and this is a so-called saw rasp. It's a really nice tool with really rough serrations here. It's even better than the shredder. I don't use the shredder that much anymore, by the way. It just falls into a weird category for me where all the aggressive stuff I would usually do with this, with the shredder I do with this, which is again dangerous. And all the less aggressive stuff I will just do with my serrated knife or some of the sandpapers and all that. So just check out your construction store for items that can be used. Like, quit the shredder cold and just check out what else you can use. Or use the shredder, I don't care. Anyway, metal airsoft gun. So, mechanical abrasion, that's it. And on top of it, you can add some dust and paint. So the same formula is for everything else. The one thing you must watch out in airsoft guns for is just stuff the barrel and other relevant parts, other relevant pathways to the inside, stuff them or duct tape them off with something that you can later remove just to prevent all of the dust and paint and all that going into the sensitive parts of your gun. Otherwise, you mess up your gun from the inside, you don't want that, you just want to mess it up from the outside. Next one. Update on distressing leather in general. I did that. Distressing fake or fox leather in particular. Now, I will tell you how to do it, but before I tell you how to do it, let me tell you that fake leather is such a horrible material. It's so incredibly, abysmally bad as a material that I don't even consider it to exist at all. It's that bad. Like, if there is the worst material to work with as a costume designer for me, that will be fake leather. It will tear really easily in a bad way that you don't want it to tear. It will disintegrate on its own sometimes after you have distressed it, again structurally in a way way beyond what you intended for it. After you're done distressing and think, oh, it's great, and then it will just fall apart as you move around with it on a convention or whatever. And due to its unnatural nature, because it's a synthetic material, it will a lot of times behave in erratic ways. So one type of fake leather will behave entirely different than the other one. Using chemicals might do God knows what to it, and using abrasion, you might not even get the result that you're looking for by using chemical abrasion with it. Because real leather has like this layer of tanning and paint and whatnot that you can mechanically remove and then it looks worn. Not always the case with fake leather, again depending on which type exactly. Sometimes you can do abrasion all the way through and it's all the same plasticky material and you end up with no result whatsoever. So the only thing you can do to it reliably, I mean obviously you can experiment with it and see what kind of mechanical abrasion you can apply. If you apply mechanical abrasion to it, just do it gently, okay? That's the only thing. Do it way more gently than you would to normal leather. That's how you deal with it. Other than that, paint as well as dusting and all that. Just go very lightly on mechanical abrasion. But if you can avoid using fake leather, avoid using it. You will not be happy with it most of the times. Next point, distress things where they are worn, elbows, knees, and so on. This is what I mean by high contact areas. It is not such a good idea to distress everything universally. For example, if you're doing a short, do a lot of here because you take it on and off, do a lot of sleeves, or if you have a long sleeve, elbows, this wears out a lot. So just think about how it would be used in everyday life and or combat and apply more distressing to those areas. Also regarding this formula, usually good idea to use mechanical distressing first because then you have, for example, fabric will have some threads hanging out, and if you go on top of that with your paint and then your dust and your wax, it will look like it has been really worn a lot of times. If you do it in the opposite direction, then you will have some fresh threads hanging out of a certain part that you just worked on. If you do it after everything else, which can be a good story to tell, but for the most part that is not what you want. Clothes that are worn directly on the body, how to paint and distress them. That's how I do shorts. I actually did a video about that. It's called making stencils and post-apocalyptic short. So that's exactly what you're doing. You don't apply any fat, you don't apply any dusting to it. You could, but I usually don't. I usually just do mechanical distressing and then apply some fabric paints. I've talked about how to apply paints in the past and mistakes and all that. Applying layers, not doing strokes that obviously look like paint, all that. So not repeating that. How to distress delicate parts that would be destroyed by normal way of distressing. Yeah, gently. Either no mechanical distressing at all, or just gentle mechanical distressing in high stress areas. And paints are your friend for this kind of stuff. Reminder on the question I got a long time ago, how to distress a leotard for a post-apocalyptic circus performer. A very gentle fabric, you don't want to rip it because it will just disintegrate and so on and so forth. Just use paints. And you can also use stencils for the graphical design part, but we're talking about distressing specifically here, so paints. I also am not a fan of using a lot of structural distressing, like structural mechanical distressing on pants, especially in the crotch area. You want to stay away from ripping actual holes into the crotch of your pants for obvious reasons, okay? You don't want a crotch hole to expand while you're on LARP or convention or whatever, which is why for pants I will usually use more paint than mechanical distressing. I will use some mechanical distressing on like pockets and all that. All the stuff that doesn't leave you with a gaping crotch hole in case it starts to deteriorate. Because those parts do live. They deteriorate from the holes you put in them more and more. And at some point they reach the end of their life cycle. How to weather mirror lens and visors for masks, helmets or glasses. Keeping the possibility to see. And how to distress stuff so you do not make it useless for its purpose. Example, glasses, not disrupted vision. Now, the way I do this, wait a sec, is this. So in the middle you see it's still clear, I can see through this. And on the outsides it's a lot of weathering and paint, especially, and dusting and all that. And it actually makes absolute sense. Like, this is actually the most realistic way, because no matter how much stuff you have flying around and sticking to your glasses, you will wipe them in the middle to still be able to see. Now, there are also other methods. For example, if you add some scratches even to the parts that you look through, you will still maintain the most of your vision. Obviously, don't do it to your actual glasses that you need in real, for real. Another way that I never tried but can think of is one-way vision foil. That might work. One-way vision foil. Just search for it on the internet. I never tried it again. You can use mesh like in airsoft glasses. However, a warning if you actually plan on playing airsoft with those. Mesh is not great at stopping fragments of airsoft pellets coming at your eyes, but you can use it for the purpose stated here. And also keep in mind that all those movies and stuff where some characters have glowing eyes and stuff, sometimes they just can't see anything. Sometimes they will have eye slits not where the glowing eye that is meant for the viewer is. So just because you see something in a movie doesn't mean that people feel great wearing that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Just one thing to keep in mind. So that is my answer to this question. For the most part, just try to apply it, around, keeping the middle clear, and also apply some scratches, possibly, and also one-way vision foil might be a thing to experiment with, or mesh, also a thing to experiment with. There is no perfect solution for this. How to weather that metal that has a shiny coating on it? Well, mechanical abrasion. That's all I'm gonna say about this. Whichever metal it is you're working on, sandpaper. Weathering plastics. Same thing. Mechanical abrasion, plastic, dust, all of the stuff I've talked about. There is one bonus point to plastics, or a anti-bonus, a malus point to plastics. Depending on what kind of plastic it is, you can possibly use some sort of chemical compounds it reacts with to distress it. For example, ABS plastic will get dissolved by acetone, so you can use that. Or for example, some cool effects like spraying acetone on it and then dusting all over it. I never tried it, but it might be cool. Of course, again, wear a mask and all that, not to breathe it all in. So plastics sometimes will react to some chemical compounds, but it's such a broad topic. The reason this universal formula is universal, at least for me, is because it saves me a lot of time and headache. I don't have to go like, oh, this is plastic. What kind of plastic is it? Let's think about exactly what paint to use on it. Let's order the specific kind of paint. Let's find out which chemicals to use on it. No, I just do the same process for almost everything, and I'm done fast. And while you're researching how to absolutely correctly distress this and this, that and blah type of plastic, I'm done with 5 or so works because I just save so much time by using this universal formula, which is why you should also do it. So distressing plastic, if you want to be more specific, try to find out what kind of plastic you have at hand, because they're very, very different. Plastic is not equal plastic whatsoever. And find something that will dissolve it or react to it, whatever, and so on and so forth. But also be careful not to create some toxic chemical compound. How to make duct tape look old and worn without making it brittle. I'm not sure what kind of duct tape you're using that becomes brittle or how you distress it, but again, I would skip mechanical abrasion almost entirely to not compromise its structure, but then I would use paints. Same thing. Do you use a heat gun for distressing nylon materials, either to make burns or to melt the fly-away bits down after shredding cutting? Why or why not? In fact, when I have some melty kind of plasticky fabric material like a nylon belt, I will usually use, again, this guy or my serrated knife or some other sort of mechanical distressing method. And then I will either leave the threads hanging, or I will apply some paint to them, or I will sometimes use my lighter, burning them up, which can be a bit dangerous. It creates toxic fumes you shouldn't inhale, and it also catches fire. So a heat gun might be a better solution to this. I'm just lazy, I don't personally do it, but I think a heat gun might be a cleaner solution to this. So I personally do not, but you can experiment with this. I don't see why not experiment with this, just be careful. And it looks cool for me when the ends are a bit burned, but again, burning something is generally not a good idea, so be very careful. If you are actually going for an effect that is supposed to look burned, I have a video named hammer distressing, or using hammer for distressing. That plus some paint will create a burned looking effect for fabric without setting your stuff on fire for real. Setting your stuff on fire for real is a horrible idea, as I just said, for obvious reasons, and it's even worse if you're setting like your entire piece on fire as opposed to just like some tiny belt that I was just talking about. Do not set your stuff on fire. Use the hammer distressing instead. Distressing those fabrics that don't actually respond to the usual techniques, ripstop, stretch spandex type stuff using on some bullet or gear holding pockets, okay? So basically military fabrics, stuff that doesn't want to be broken. You can use paint and dirt on those materials, but it's hard to get a good look. Stretchy fabric in particular, because once it's stretched, the paint patterns show and new unstressed areas are exposed. Well, to the latter part, then just stretch your thing first and paint it then, because then you will get most of the things. Then there's also the point about avoid technical perfection. You don't need to do 100% of it. And if it's the kind of fabric that wouldn't get 100% of its surface distressed realistically, why stress about it so much? Just get as much as you can. Other than that, usually for those kinds of fabrics, more aggressive mechanical abrasion, so just more elbow grease. You can just use, this kind of saw rasp, just more aggressive mechanical abrasion, and then you again rely more on paints. And it does get a look that is good enough for me, so just up your paintwork game, use more layers, use more colors and all that are however harmonic with each other. My answer to this is paint, and it looks good enough for me. I've did it a lot of times on these pants, which are also army pants that I'm working on right now. I'm also using mostly paint, and you know my philosophy about pants anyway, so there is some mechanical distressing here, right? But it's not everywhere. What is everywhere is paint. So that is my answer to that question. Just don't stress about it too much, and if it doesn't look good enough to you, up your paint work. And also try using wax stuff. By the way, using the wax might or might not make you more flammable, so watch out for that as well. Next question. Best way to clean/wash distressed garments. If you use fabric paints, and I would use almost exclusively or just exclusively fabric paints and stuff that is right on your body, also to keep it soft, because if you overdo the amount of paint, it will get stiff and not comfortable to wear at all. So if you use fabric paints, you can pretty much chuck your thing into the washing machine and it will stay almost exactly the same. But if you want to go the extra careful mile, just wash by hand or just use a very mild washing program. Rubber paint, painting rubber in general. Now, I have painted some rubber things in general. I'm looking around now to see if I have some examples here, but I can't dismount that. Anyway, so far, I always applied the same methods to rubber as well. Does it hold well on rubber? No. Does it matter? No. But some of you want to just recolor your rubber thing completely. Like, let's say you have a regular army green rubber mask, you want to have it red for your samurai build or whatever, which is not what Joe did on his samurai build, by the way. If you want to do that, there are special rubber paints out there, which I personally never tried because I never needed to. They work for a while, to a certain extent, better than acrylic and all the other stuff, but also not perfectly. Now I have a advice from Callum to use Plastidip, or whatever was the name in the UK. Basically this sort of spray paint that is a polymer rubber paint, and what it does is just create a coat of rubber around your entire piece. I guess you would go about modding a gas mask, recoloring a whole gas mask with this by covering it all from both sides, because it doesn't matter with this type of paint, Plastidip. That's what cosplayers use as well to cover their EVA. It just coats it entirely in a layer of rubber. People also use it on their cars and all that. It will not hold 100% either, but people say it works. Again, I never tried it myself. So type of paint that will just coat it entirely, that doesn't care what's inside of the coat, that just lives by being a rubber shell itself. Okay, that might work for rubber, and then you can paint with other paints on top of that. You can paint with other paints on top of Plastidip. That is general cosplayer stuff. You can find a lot of information about this elsewhere. How would you make permanent sweat stains? Very diluted fabric paints. I would also not go with black. I would go with, assuming you have a light colored top, I would go with something like beige or sand colored or something like this, some tea colored stuff maybe. Some people will also use diluted tea and all that, but that's too much hassle for me, so I just use diluted fabric paints. That would be my advice here. Tips for fur slash faux fur or fake fur for a more tribal hunter look. Like, what look you're doing it for doesn't matter. But fur in general, first of all, for moral reasons, I don't use anything except second-hand fur. If I use it at all, ever, and I use more fake or fox fur. That is what is also found in the old model of the German parka jacket, on the inside of the hood and stuff. Well, the same tips as usual, the standard formula. Paint will get you a long way. I do not recommend setting it on fire. It will smell and be bad in 5 different kinds of ways. So just the standard painting method. That is my tips for fur. And it will make it look dirty and all that. It's great. Alright, now I have a small section here, ways to not distress stuff. Setting your stuff on fire for real, cover that. Organic oils that go rancid. Yeah, a lot of organic oils will go rancid, so don't use organic oils. Also avoid mineral oils, especially do not use used up motor oil that has toxic stuff in it. If you want fat, use beeswax. It smells nice, it's cool. Organic powders that mold, I covered this in my original video 6 years ago already, but like if you use flour or something that will mold, generally do some research on whatever you're putting on your stuff before you put it on. And a bonus advice from Kleiner Zorn, also known as Red Roach Gear. Always wear old shitty clothes when weathering. I can't stress how many items of clothing I ruined just because I wanted to quickly weather that thing before I do something else. I can only attest to that. I am wearing my distressing clothes right now. It's like just some old jogging pants with the crotch ripped already and all that. This is not my shirt I use for distressing. It's way too nice for that with the cool turtle here. So yeah, let me know in the comments about which specific not yet covered techniques you would like me to make some more detailed videos in the future. Let me know what you think about this update and FAQ video in general. I will see you in the next episode, and also I will see you in the Nuclear Snail community group, which is linked in the video description. It's on Facebook. And also, if you're a regular viewer, please support me on Patreon. That is what keeps this channel going and developing and allows me to give you more tips from my experience. And until then, hail the snail!